Hi there, welcome to or welcome back to Tiff Reads Books, where I read books and I talk to you about them. I saw this post on Threads this morning. Is it called a thread? Or is it called a post? I saw this post on Threads. We're going to stick with post. And the poster was talking about how with the explosion of romantasy in the last couple of years, that she's really kind of depressed and surprised that Kushiel's Legacy, which is the name of the series by Jacqueline Carey. This is the second book. I don't have the first one. My boyfriend owns 2 copies of this and 2 copies of the third, but 1 copy of the first, and it's missing the cover because it has been through a lot. He's had it for like 15 years. So this is Kushiel's Legacy. This is a high fantasy series by Jacqueline Carey. So I saw this post on Threads this morning, and it was talking about how the poster was a little surprised and a little disappointed that more people are not talking about the Kushiel's Legacy series given the explosion of interest in romantasy. She said, according to her, that every point that you would want hit with ACOTAR, this series by Jacqueline Carey is going to hit. And that it's going to be extremely well written, which it is, and also has more spice, which maybe not. I'll get into that. And I have some opinions on that. I've seen this referenced a few times before because when I was first looking up this book, when my boyfriend first wanted me to read it, I saw it referenced on a couple of like romantasies that you should read lists, and I was very confused. This is not a romantasy. So I'm going to start off by, I keep wanting to talk about the series and I just haven't done it yet. So we're going to try and be brief here. Like, we're going to make brevity our friend today. So, Kushiel's Legacy is a 3-book trilogy, and it follows Fedra No Delone, who is a high-end courtesan, but she doesn't start out that way. We start following her from the age of like 6 when she is given to the night court, and that court is one that trains courtesans. She does not start training at 6. I've seen a lot of people be like, oh, but she's like not even hit puberty when she starts training. She starts training on how to serve like plates and cups and how to be like a house servant at that age. While that is still like, we don't really go for child labor. It is a fantasy setting. It's like kind of a little bit like Renaissance-ish type era, I would guess. So, I mean, is that weird? Yeah, it's freaking weird. But it's not, there's nothing sexual until a little bit later in the series. So, which I'll get into because I know that there are other things that might bother some people about the age of our character. This book was written in 2000, or published in 2000. This book is the second book, and this has a publication date of 2004. So we start following Fedra. Let me backtrack. We're following Fedra as she's going through her training, and at one point in the beginning of the book, she learns that she has something different about her, where she's not considered perfect by the standards of the specific house of the night court that she's been given to, because she has this, what they call a scarlet mote. So she has brown eyes, I believe, and she has like a little red dot in her eye. And that red dot is a flaw, according to this one house that she's been given to. So they're trying to sell her to another house. The way that the selling works here is basically it's a bond, and she will have to earn it off and pay it back. And once she's paid, she's free. Okay, so we have some levels of different things in here. Is any of this sounding like people who like ACOTAR are going to like this? Because this does not sound like the same plot points to me so far. Or the typical type of plot points. But I'm going to get into those differences. I just want to give you an overview, and I'm feeling kind of rambly. So maybe brevity is not going to be our friend today. So Fedra learns this, and then she is a very willful girl. And she breaks the house rules by sneaking out into town, and she makes this friend called Hyacinth in town, and he is kind of a description of Romani, and I actually think this doesn't do it as horribly as a lot of other things. It talks about it being a very rich and vibrant culture. We do have some sexism within the culture, but we have a sexism within a lot of different cultures in this book, but it's just kind of inspired by the traveling type culture that is typically associated with Romani. So he is part of that culture, and he becomes her best friend, and they start kind of teaching each other about different things. And they're like she has a propensity to explore and break the rules, and he tends to kind of actually pull her back a little bit, which I thought was kind of fun. So we get a couple little scenes with them, but then she gets caught sneaking out, and so she gets punished. And when she gets whipped, so child abuse, she actually finds pleasure in it. Not like, because she's very young, it's not explicitly sexual, but she finds it to be like a painful and pleasurable experience, and she's very confused about it. Enter this man, Anafiel Delone. So her name is not Delani yet. Delorney. The audiobook has a different accent, and she kept saying Delorney, but it's Delani is how it's spelt. So Anafiel Delani is kind of a noble, but almost not. He's just like a wealthy man. And he recognizes what Phaedra is right away, that she's been marked by the god Kushiel, and so she will feel pleasure from pain. He offers an exorbitant amount of money for her, but not until she's 11. He does not want to take her until she's 11. He wants her to continue learning all of her like courtly duties and stuff. So once he comes and picks her up, I'm kind of summarizing like the first like 30% of the book for you almost. When he comes and picks her up, she immediately thinks that she's going to be going into service for him, but he's like, no, you're a child, and that's not how my house works. And he gives her an education. Like, she starts learning languages. She starts learning historical songs, poems. She starts learning languages for like throughout the region. This girl becomes like crazy good at linguistics. And he also starts teaching her how to listen and pick up on the unsaid parts of conversations, because he's going to turn her into a spy. So he also has another boy that he purchased from another court, from another house of the night court, and he's training that boy in the same way. And so they kind of become like these like cute little adoptive siblings, and their relationship is very like, I really love their relationship. Can I remember his name right now? Alcuin, I believe. So they're like little siblings. And at the age of 13 is when they can choose whether they are going to go into this courtesan training by pledging to the goddess Nama. And so the act of being a courtesan is actually a religious act within this world. So this world views sexual intimacy as a very pleasurable and like form of worship experience. They don't have a lot of taboos. They are very openly sexual within like polite society. Like, it's not like outwardly like locker room talk, but everyone is very open about the fact that they have sex in this culture. Like, it's not a religious taboo here. And in that, all forms of sex and love are accepted in this society, which was a shocker for me for a 2000s high fantasy. And I was very pleasantly shocked by it. So Phaedra actually pledges to Nama. She gets accepted, because you have to ask and then be accepted by the goddess. She gets accepted, and she's like, great, I'm gonna finally start my training, right? Because she's just a horny little teenager, and she's like, I'm gonna start my training. And Delani's like, no, you're not. And he brings in this teacher who was a super high courtesan, and he brings her in, and she teaches them like the fundamentals from a very clinical way. And so Alcuin is very much like, okay, this is study, this is serious. He's like taking it serious. He's not in it for the horny. Phaedra is in it for the horny. And Alcuin like kind of reprimands her once or twice about it, because he's like, this is serious business. What the fuck is wrong with you? And so she's upset that they're learning everything from textbooks, and they're learning like the theory behind all of these like special moves they have to learn to do and everything. And she's upset that they're not getting to physically practice it, but their teacher is like, girl, you're a child. So it's not until she's actually 16, which yes, is still very young, but again, this is fantasy, and it was written in the 2000s, and the 2000s were a very different time than 2024 as far as that type of expectation on the age of like things. So she is 16 when she has her first experience, and because of what she is, she ends up getting a pretty high price for her first time. So she becomes a very desired courtesan because of the fact that she feels pain as pleasure. And there's basically a lot of like fucked up people who just really want to inflict pain on her. And then there's other people who really want like a consensual BDSM experience, and she gets pleasure out of it, they get pleasure out of it. She does get pleasure out of all these experiences. One of the things that I really did like, so the first one going into it was like I was not expecting that. Like, that was abrupt. Was not expecting it. But the thing with this is it is all about consent in all of these situations. She's given a safe word that is in the contract between Anafiel and her, what do they call it? Her assignation. It's an assignation. So between the guy or the woman, because she gets contracts bought by women a lot too. She has like a safe word that is like her edge. Like, she can be like, absolutely not. They always have to be respectful. They like, you know, it is a consensual situation despite how violent it can seem. And there is always like a kind of aftercarry type moment. I'm not in the BDSM scenes, so I can't give you whether it's a good representation or not. But for me, as someone who tends to have issues with aggressive type situations, in that scenario, I did not have issues with it in the first book. There's some stuff in the very last book that is weird. Hold on, let me fix my chair. So there's some stuff in the last book that gets a little off the railsy, but I think it was done for a reason. So this is kind of the arc. So she becomes this high-end spy for noble people within the court of the realm that she's in. And we are kind of in fantasy France, which was interesting because the audio narrator, which I do like these books on audio, but the audio narrator had a British accent, which meant then when we went to fantasy England, she changed some of the accents to not fantasy England. She gave them like fantasy American accents. And so we're set in fantasy France, okay? Where fantasy France is like our home base. And some of this book takes place in fantasy Scotland, England, Wales, Ireland. And then the next book we go to like Italy, and we have kind of this, and then the last book we go to the Middle East and Africa. And so we kind of have this like world picture-ish. I mean, this European-centric world picture. We also do some like Scandinavian stuff in the first book. But so we have this really big arc. So where I struggle, right? So this is kind of, let me back it up and give you the actual plot. So I've given you an introduction to Phaedra. So the actual plot of the first book, is Anafiel is using Phaedra as a spy, and a bunch of shit goes down where she discovers a plot against the queen. And she ends up kind of having to figure out a diplomatic way to present that to the queen, and also get the queen, is that the first book? Get the queen together with her betrothed. And that requires getting this like god of the strait to allow them to cross. So their gods are actually physically living in this world, and have a major impact on the living world. And she ends up in this like war camp in Scandinavia and reveals like another plot. There's multiple like plots. Like, this is like plot arcs within each book. This is heavy politics. Heavy politics, big historical events. A lot of the events in these books are based on actual historic wars within specific regions. We are meshing the times all together, but this is very heavy political fantasy, which is why I do not think if you like ACOTAR, you would like this book, if that's your like primary, right? Okay, so I'm not saying that people who like romantasy don't like high fantasy. But I think if you primarily read romantasy and romance, has anything I've said so far like ticked a box for you, apart from that there's some spice in it? And I think that's where people get messed up with like fantasy and recommendations of like romantasy and fantasy recommendations, is people are like, oh, if you like romantasy, you just want some fantasy with some spice. And I genuinely don't think that's the case, right? Because this book over here, The Gunslinger, is a fantasy book set in another world, and there is a weird spice. There's like 2 weird spicy scenes in here. One is with a freaking succubus. Like, so would I recommend that to people who read romantasy? Absolutely not. Because it's not hitting the same notes. And I really don't think that this series is going to be hitting the same notes for people. I love this series, but I'm not going to go recommending it to people just because it has some spice in it, and therefore it's going to hit the notes that you want. Because I think, having read some romantasy books myself, and I do like some, I like the T. Kingfisher ones a lot because her humor is just right up my alley, but I don't like all of them that I've read. And some I can tolerate more than others. Like For the Wolf was okay. Fourth Wing was not for me at all. Which is why I haven't read the ACOTAR books, but I have listened to Carrie Can Reed's like 3-hour-long plot videos. Thank you for making those, because I was able to like get rid of my FOMO without having to suffer through a book that I knew I was not going to like. And then I don't have to leave a review and upset people about a book I knew I was not going to like. So that's why I haven't read those books, because I got a great plot breakdown. But what I think, why romantasy readers like are a different breed of fantasy, and I'm not saying that one is better than the other at all. They are just in two separate categories, and comparison is the thief of joy. You cannot compare the two. They are just different things, right? I, though, do not think if we were to compare plot styles, not to say one's better than another, but to see where things line up, right? Because we want to look at an arc, and we want to look at an arc, okay? Romantasy tends to be faster paced for most of the popular ones. Faster paced. We have a love interest introduced early on into the book, and we have romance and fantasy kind of right at the forefront, like flipping back and forth between each other. What we don't have in romantasy is a lot of heavy world building. We're not focusing on giving you the lineages of characters. We're not focused on giving you a history of the world in detail. We are not focused on telling you about the politics. We're not doing these like big political intrigue. We might do a little bit here and there to keep you interested in a plot, but we are not having big long conversations about treaties, which we are having in these books. We're not giving you like songs in depth, and like we're not this slow pace, right? So there is a romance, but it's very small, and it does not happen until near the end of the book, and it's not even necessarily a romance. There is a forced proximity where Phaedra gets a guard who is a member of the Casseline Brotherhood. And the Casselines they have taken a pledge of celibacy because we have all these different gods in the world. So Phaedra's goddess is one of sexual pleasure and the pleasures of the flesh. Jocelyn's god is one who subscribed to celibacy. And there's some really interesting like things between these gods that we get in later books that I found fascinating. But Jocelyn and Phaedra definitely don't like each other in the beginning of the book. They're not even introduced until like halfway through the book. And Jocelyn is very judgy of Phaedra, and for very specific reasons. And things just happen where they end up getting close, and an event happens, and it's a whole thing. There's no romance between the two of them, really. There's like it's not a romance in the first book. Okay, so we're not really scratching like a romance itch. If you want some spicy scenes, okay, but here's the difference, right? The spicy scenes in these books do not use a lot of graphic language. While the scene might be explicit in nature, we're not getting overly detailed explanations of, thankfully, body fluids. Like, we're not getting uses of like graphic words. We're getting things like annoying words. But it's not, the sex scenes feel a little more clinical. They're more about to tell you like this happened rather than like to make you kind of feel some type of way, right? And the other thing is we're getting more detail about the kind of violent foreplay leading up to the main event, because that is more about what the characters in the book are doing. So there's differences in that, and I really don't think it's going to hit the same notes. To me, I was saying to someone earlier today that I think it's very similar to if you were to say, oh, you like Outlander, you should really watch the movie The Highlander, because they're both kind of set in like Scotland and they both involve time travel. So you would really like both of them. Could you imagine telling someone who like really loves Game of Thrones because of the political intrigue and the fight scenes, and you're like, oh, you like fantasy books, or you like fantasy movies, right? Because let's talk about the show, right? You like fantasy stuff? You know, if you really like Game of Thrones, you would really love The Princess Bride. They're two very different tones. Like, yes, we have some like overlap between some things because they're both fantasy. There are sword fighting scenes in both. There's like a woman who has to marry a man she doesn't want to marry, and like something happens where she gets rescued. They're the same thing. Not the same thing. It's like I said, like I would not recommend The Gunslinger to someone who wants to read a fantasy book with some spice in it. Because yes, it's a fantasy book with some spice in it. It's not a fantasy book with some spice in it. Like, I think we need to be mindful of why we're suggesting things to people. The people that I do think would like this series, though, is if you are a Robin Hobb girly, or like me, who's like new to Robin Hobb, these books are very similar. I really like to say that Phaedra and Fitz had a very similar beginning to the start of their life. Like, both of them were given up by their parents who didn't want them. Like, Phaedra's mom was also a courtesan. She married her dad, and then they had Phaedra, and she was like, I don't want this kid. Just get this kid out of my face. And gave her to this court. Fitz's mom was like, I don't want this kid anymore. Here, take him. And like, you're his dad, you can have him. And well, you're related to his dad and you can have him. The difference here, okay, is that Fitz was raised by someone, Burrich, who I love, who was never expecting to have a child in his life. He was never expecting to have to raise someone. He was not prepared, and he raised him the best that he knew, which was to raise him like an animal. Like, because Burrich is a stable master, he knows horses and dogs. He was like, how different can a kid be? And Fitz had no like parental supervision. He had no guidance until it was like way later in his life when Patience came in and was like, boy, you need an education. And she didn't know what she was doing either. She had no idea. And she was like way too late into his life. And poor Fitz was just kind of told, like, you have to do these things. Figure it out. He was never given any guidance in his life. And Phaedra, on the other hand, was also brought in from this poor situation into a wealthy situation. And she was given all the tools she needed, all the guidance she needed. She was allowed to make choices on what she was going to do. It was all her choice. Basically, when she was like 13, Anafiel was like, if you don't want to do this, you don't have to do this. We'll figure out something else, right? Like, you don't have to. We'll figure out something else. But she wanted to. And granted, yes, she was a child making that decision, and you can make an argument about that, but we're talking about a book, not a person, okay? So some like separation from reality here, some suspension of disbelief, because we are in a world where that is the morality and that is acceptable, and we need to separate it from our world. But if we look at the two children together, what could Fitz have been if he had had an Anafiel in his life? And so I was reading the two books at very similar times, and I cannot stop thinking about that, right? Because Phaedra was also very headstrong. She was very stubborn. She was very much determined to do her own thing, her own way. Fitz had a lot of that too, and Fitz has these like special gifts. His gifts were ignored, and he was told to stifle them. Phaedra was told, your gift makes you very valuable, and we're going to exploit that gift. Like, she ends up paying off her bond very early in her life because of who she is. So the two had very different opportunities in life, and I love the idea of seeing two characters who start off very similar and have these just branching life experiences. And I just wonder what would happen if you had swapped the scenarios sometimes. And I can't stop thinking about that. So I really think if you like Robin Hobb, you will like Jacqueline Carey. I also say this blurb right here says, Kushiel's Chosen is an elegant, intricate, sensual, and captivating. Once you pick it up, you won't want to put it down. And that's Robert Jordan. It is also, the other books are blurbed by George R.R. Martin. If you like, I keep gesturing because I have like the Wheel of Time and stuff up here somewhere. If you like high fantasy with political intrigue, right, you will like these books. I do also think if you like The Blade itself, you will probably like these books. I just finished the first one of that series, of the First Law series, and these all feel very similar. I really recommend this if you like those. If you like romantasy, maybe give it a try if you think political intrigue is something for you. But I have seen so many comments from people who read romantasy that when they pick up a high fantasy book, they find it boring. They don't like the plot pacing. It does not work for them. If you know you don't like political stuff, like if you think Star Wars is just politics in space, you're not going to like this. So I just... be mindful of who you suggest books to and comp titles that you choose to comp, like, because you're setting people up for failure when you don't think about their actual interests when you recommend a book. And I really think that's the important thing, rather than being like, if you like this, you should like something that is better. Better is subjective. And I think, for me, this is a better style of writing. But I know plenty of other people that would hate this style of writing. And the style of writing in Fourth Wing and ACOTAR is the style of writing they want. They find that to be the better style of writing because it's easy to pick it up, to read, to understand what's going on, and you don't need to like spend all your time figuring out what's happening. You can just turn your brain off and go. And those are two very different things. And telling to someone who likes one style of writing for a very specific reason that they should be liking another style of writing for a very different reason does not make sense and sets people up for failure. And I just really think we need to think about that. So that's all I got today. I'll see you soon.